With no much further ado, I will open this session telling you, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, thank you for being here. So many of you, it's quite seldom for this kind of meetings at the European Parliament, and thank you also and especially for coming and say no to those silly questions about the silence of the Jews of France and of Belgium. I was saying precisely from France. In France, like elsewhere, thank you for being silent. In France, like elsewhere, in France, like in Israel, Jews are politically diverse, but like in the United States, like in France, like in Israel, Jews are very in majority fierce supporters of the freedom, of the enlightenment, and of the democracy. In France, like in Israel, there are very, very few, a very small minority of minorities to put the reading of the text above the Republic and dream to imitate Iran, its theocracy, and its primacy of the clergy over the parliament, the justice, and the armed forces, and mainly over the citizens and the female citizens. This minority was threatening to impose itself in Israel because the leader of a major party needed this minority to escape the law. Israel was threatened, is threatened by a trip to the darkness, but we know that this perspective triggered something, a proof of its vitality, a proof of its democracy. Several months ago, Israel took to the streets, the startups and the army, younger and older Ashkenazi, Russians and Sephardis took to the streets. The vast majority of Israelis are defending a secular and democratic state, a regime, a political regime, for which the democracy is not only the organization of ballots, but by the existence and also, it's so basic, of checks and balances and a strict separation of powers. It's by solidarity with this Israel that we gathered this evening, but we're also gathered here because all European Democrat has a duty to defend the state of law, and especially in the margins of the Union and within the Union. What we fight against in Budapest, we have also to fight against in Jerusalem. And this is why the European MEP that I am is honored and is in his role as an elected member of the MEP to foster this meeting of JCall, and we welcome you with hope and pride. I will now leave the floor to David Chemla, who, as embodiment of JCall, will be the organizer of this evening, the MC, who will give the floor and remind those who speak too long that they shouldn't talk so long. Thank you, David. You have the floor. Thank you, Bernard. First, thank you and all the team that is with you, around you at the European Parliament, who helped us to organize this meeting. It's been a lot of work, and I really wish to highlight that. And this evening, we also organize it with the Jewish Center David Susskind, the secular center in Belgium. Most of their members are present here, and thank you for helping us organize this evening. When we picked several weeks ago with our commission to prepare this date of March 27, we couldn't imagine how much it will become a historic day that will remain in the history of the State of Israel, and we'll see how the events will progress. For us, it was a need to be here. Here, where 13 years ago, in May 2010, in this place, which for 450 million Europeans is the temple of European democracy, we launched the appeal of JCall. It was 13 years ago. Then we called onto the leaders to warn them, flag them about the dangers threatening the state of Israel. This time, it's not a danger from the enemies from outside Israel, but a danger that they were obscuring the existence. We, as European citizen Jews, are absolutely attached to a danger that was weighing the ongoing occupation on a population that wished and craved for its independence. 13 years ago, we were reminded that there was a need to put an end to it and to create a Palestinian state alongside the state of Israel, for Israel to remain a sustainable state, a Jewish state like the founding father wanted it. That was 13 years ago. Today, we're again here to launch a new appeal to the Israeli leaders of the day, for some of them are the same than those 13 years ago, to the previous danger still present, but that aggravated itself, is added a new danger, which is no less dangerous. The danger to see this country lose its democratic value due to a circumstantial majority at the Knesset. We call on the leaders that they are not only today responsible of the future of a state that they have to lead the policy of, they're also responsible of a hope that has been born after 2,000 years. Some would say by miracle, others by the will of its founding fathers and the historic circumstances. But this third temple may also disappear. It may disappear not due to the external threats, which are still present, but due to the internal threats, the division that would cause a vote by the Knesset of laws that would lead to the abandonment of the separation and of the checks and balances between the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary, that are the conditions of democracy. Israel was created as a Jewish and democratic state. I do highlight and Jewish because it was and still is the meaning of the Zionist project. Democratic because it's the lesson we Jews have taken away from history. We know the debt we owe to democracy. It's since its beginning that we acquired a full citizenship in the states we're living in and where this regime is in power. If Israel exists today, it owes it to its people, but also to the liberal democracy that is supporting it since its creation. Leave this family, which is reducing itself on the globe, would be as dangerous for Israel as the worst of the external threats. Finally, we're here also and mainly with what is happening in the streets of Israel to bring our support to the hundreds of thousands of Israelis who for the past weeks take to the streets shrouded in the flag of Israel, and we shout with them, Demokratia, Demokratia. I don't think we need a translation. Everyone understands this in all the languages. Those are the messages we delivered today in this room, and all the speakers that I thank for their presence, that I will present one after the other, came here to say that, each and every one in their own way. So the evening will go on. Some speakers will speak. We have videoed some other speakers who cannot be with us today. So, like today, I will leave the floor to Mrs. Dominique Schnapper, who is not here. We recorded her in Paris. She is the chair of the Musée d'Art Juif, a sociologist, former member of the Constitutional Council, which we thought was the best person to explain why those laws are threatening the definition of what is a democracy. Please, Mrs. Schnapper.
J'espère que ça marche.
What do you think of the law that would reduce the powers of the Supreme Court, was the question. There are a series of laws that are worrying. The first one is the questioning of the Constitutional Court, because since Israel does not have a constitution, the role of the Supreme Court is especially important in political life. And it's one of the signs of illiberal democracies to always attack what is called either the Supreme Court or the Supreme Council or the Constitutional Court. The reform project has two dimensions. The first one is the change of its recruitment process, which no longer ensures the superiority of lawyers over politicians, which is the first point. And the second point is that the decisions of the Supreme Court, according to the project, can be amended by a decision of the Knesset. And the very principle of a Supreme Court is to be above all political decisions. It's the affirmation of the principle of the rule of law over political decisions. And therefore, by providing that in certain cases the Knesset will be able to reverse a decision of the Supreme Court, one of the absolutely fundamental principles of the liberal order is impacted, which is both morally disturbing and is, I think, politically very dangerous, because the only real allies of Israel are liberal democracies. And to alienate liberal democracies with this kind of provision seems to be neither morally nor politically very beneficial to the fate of Israel. Majority rule is part of democracy, but so is respect for minorities, and above all, respect for the rule of law. It's within the rule of law that majority rule must be respected. And by definition, in democracy, the political regime is provisional because it is subject to the next election, while the rule of law is permanent. By giving the Knesset the possibility of reversing a decision of the Supreme Court, the rule of law is called into question in the name of a majority which by definition is provisional. Democracy, precisely, is characterized by the transcendence of all ethnic or religious affiliations. And therefore, like many societies, Israel, perhaps more than others, includes a series of tension, contradictions, and Jewish and democratic is a logical contradiction. But politics is about managing tensions and contradiction. The Israeli policy has always been to reconcile what is irreconcilable, which is one of the dimensions of politics, and to reconcile both the Jewish dimension, which alone justifies the existence of Israel, and on the other hand, the democratic project, which must give Israeli citizens to other than Jews. So, if the new majority inspired by the extreme right comes to make the state of Israel a state where only Jews have full citizenship, they are calling into question the democratic dimension of the country. And the always delicate balance between these two dimensions risks, with this majority, being called into question. One could not devise a liberal constitution in a country that wanted to be Jewish and democratic. It's not by chance. There are a number of major laws that serve as constitution, but Claude Klein explains it very well. The very contradiction of the Zionist project made it impossible to write a constitution. Hence, the importance of the Supreme Court, and we come back to the role of the Supreme Court, whose role was precisely to manage this fundamental tension. That is to say, to respect the great liberal principles while taking into account the Jewish dimension of the State of Israel. Otherwise, Israel has no reason to exist. And this balance is precarious and makes the current evolution worrying, where it is feared that the double dimension will not be preserved. At the moment, Israel is practically divided into two camps. There is a majority of this extreme right wing, but it is quite weak. And so there is half of the Israeli population that is in the opposition and is fighting for a liberal democracy. Given the ties of the diaspora with the Israelis, it can have an influence in supporting the struggle of the opponents. At the same time, the diaspora is not a citizen of the State of Israel. So it can have a strong influence, in the direction of their position. The particular problem is the United States, without which Israel could not exist. And so we must not, from a political point of view, we must not let Israel discourage its American ally. I think that would be very serious for its future. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Schnapper. I thought that after this presentation of the issue of this draft law, the best speaker is our friend Patrick Klugman. He's a lawyer. He's one of the founders of JCall. He was here 13 years ago. And this struggle and the other struggles to start and launch this appeal of JCall. Patrick, you have the floor. Thank you, David. This is a real, very strange thing to convene this meeting 2 months ago at the day of the acme of the democratic crisis in Israel. What is happening today is incredible. We are in a situation that the philosophy qualifies of aporia and that the politic calls stymie. Malice facing the street. There's a blocking, a stymie. There are negotiations, and the negotiations are underway while we're speaking now. But I wouldn't like this to have us forget the time we're experiencing right now, which is incredible. If I had to say one word to define what I'm thinking of, the French language is not giving it to me. I would say, Rak be'Israel. There is only in Israel where we can see what is happening currently. Alice, what is happening is not sparing any democracy. We have seen in the United States, in Europe, major countries, the most ancient democracy, which are infected by populism. But nowhere have we seen a populist reform that was blocked by a popular revolution or revolt. Think this Rak be'Israel, only in Israel. The situation is to such a point that the government is still has a majority of the Knesset, which apparently is really waning away. But the Prime Minister Netanyahu cannot move, not within, not without his coalition, not within, not without Israel, without being booed and stopped by crowds that are mobilized and that are democratic. What do those crowds ask for, demand? They first demand, what do they have? They have the Hatikva, singing the Hatikva, the national anthems. They have the flags. This was born in Tel Aviv, but it extended to Jerusalem, and even in the colonies. It's everywhere. It is gathering the high-ranking members of Tzahal. Where have we seen elsewhere an army and its officers be in favor of the freedom? Rak be'Israel. I'm telling you, I'm more hopeful than ever about the outcome of this crisis. Everywhere we have seen people standing up and demonstration where we had never seen them before. The Prime Minister itself, who expected a consensus and his authority of his position, is forbidden to move forward. The reform is not stopped. It will go on thanks to this majority without legitimacy, but for the time being it is suspended. What do we see right now? We were saying everywhere that there were no progressive camp in Israel, no more democratic camp in Israel. This country was torpedoed by the divisions. Now there is a revival of the democratic idea. This is my feeling. What are the possible outcomes? We have seen, again for the first time, the president of the state get out from his ivory tower, take the floor, and condemn what's happening. Ask the government to stop this reform and suggest with lawyers a project. This is one track possible path. We don't know what will be the outcome. We don't know if eventually the street will stop this revolt. But this will not the last irony of history if this movement that wanted to put an end to the rule of law would be put down by the Constitution, and 75, 80 years after its inception, this country may finally have a constitution. This is what I wish, because when we wish to destroy law, we have to have law and have walls of protection, because the law is always protecting the citizen. I don't want to take more time. We were very strict about the length of our speeches. There are every ways people who have a leeway, a populist leeway, but there's nowhere such a situation like this one. What is unique, what is incredible, it's the attachment, visceral attachment, incredible attachment, and in my opinion, unstoppable of the Israeli people in favor of its democratic regime. Thank you, Patrick. Anne Sinclair will take the floor. We don't have to introduce her anymore. She's a journalist, a writer, and she has the floor. David Chemla asked me to write something personal, so I did it. I'm French. I'm Jewish. I have the state of Israel, and what is happening for the past 3 months is really flabbergasting me. There's this double pride to be fully a citizen of the country where they're born and to be proud of what Israel did in 75 years. A country which has an ideal of justice, progress, that could really teach a lot to our old European democracies. I'm also a reporter. I interviewed a lot of political leaders. And if I answered to the demand of JCall at the European Parliament, it is about something totally different about the Israeli policy, because the Jews of diaspora have the right to say how much they are concerned when democracy is threatened in the name of Judaism. Some say we shouldn't speak because we don't live in Israel. We would have the right to express ourselves about the Ukraine and to keep mum about Israel. We would have the right to write about Trump and not about Netanyahu and its outrageous conduct, about the terrible words of Erdogan and not about the terrible words of Smotrich. Why? Because we're Jewish? It's as Jews that the what is hitting Israel is really touching us. I hear also those who think that we can really bring our stone to the anti-Semites without this being comparable. It reminds me the anti-Stalinians didn't want to say anything against Stalin because they didn't want to support the ugly Americans. So we would be the Trojan horse of those who wish to demolish Israel. This is hypocritical. Like many Jews, I said in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv that I was in favor of a two-state solution, while claiming my links with Israel and my support to its security, which is the case of all of us here. If we don't say a word, we will be accomplice of the danger threatening Israel. That's why we have to raise our voice. For the past 3 months, I am ashamed and I'm scared. I'm ashamed to see the head of the Israeli government ready to everything to escape, to evade justice, including to step on the elementary rules of democracy. Lawyers, Dominic Schnapper said it before me, the government wishes to keep, to mute the Supreme Court. This is a crime. Begin himself said someday he supported the Attorney General, said that her status was not carved in marble, but her position is a law. I'm ashamed that in Israel we could use the word of pogrom for a punitive action following a double murder. Pogrom, a word which for me belongs to the Jewish martyr, that I could never imagine that it could point at an action made by Jews against another people. I'm ashamed that the finance minister of a democratic state called to raise an Arab village and say things that friends called as repugnant, and how another minister, cabinet minister, said that Palestinian people didn't exist. He said that in Paris. How could he say that? I am ashamed as a woman, as an individual. I always stood up against a fanatic Islam led by fanatic clerics, Semitic women to laws, and that are pursuing LGBT people. I am incensed by seeing people who are of an ancient Judaism wishing to bring back the women to their kitchen and holding degrading words. I have many reasons to be ashamed, but I'm also scared. I'm scared for the security of Israel when people from the reserves refuse to go to the army. When the Minister of Defense himself, very worried, calls on a pause in the draft law, and that he was fired by the Prime Minister for having said the truth, we can see what kind of risk this government is for the country. When I hear the Minister of Education in Israel asking the National Library, this eminent institution of Israel, and it is a warden of the memory of the Jewish people, and to put a control over the culture is always a bad and evil action. As a journalist, I'm scared when I see when funds are cut for the Cannes Festival because they are too small inclined. We are also impacted by what is happening in Israel, and Judaism is not only a religious explanation. I don't want this country to be split. Israel is facing the most terrible threat it faces, losing its purpose, moving from a liberal state to an illiberal democracy. Democracy is not just the law of election, it's the major principles. It's old like the world to see a regime coming through the ballot imposing measures to increase its power and distance itself from democracy. This is why many are fearing a change of regime. The majority, or almost the majority, or let's say half of Israel, citizens know exactly if this is a coup d'etat. The only test is if the power of the executive has limits or not. If in the future the government decides to suppress the possibility of voting for the Arabs of Israel, to exclude the LGBT, or to cut the funds for the anti-governmental newspapers, who could oppose it? It's the Supreme Court. Citizens understood that. This is why, besides shame and fear, I'm proud that a society has such a base in itself, democracy. 500,000 people, the equivalent of 5 million in France, over 1 million in Belgium, took to the streets of Israel from north to south, on Kaplan in Tel Aviv, or in Haifa, where those women, like this terrible TV series, The Handmaid's Tale, because it's what the religious fanatics are promising as a fate for the women of Israel. It's not only the opposition that is opposing the government, it's a people which is worried that what is being done in its name. We are not here to support a opposition to a government democratically elected, but when I see the Israeli citizens Saturday after Saturday, even today, that stand up to protest. We Jews of diaspora should support them. It's an extra pride that you are also here today. Those who know me know that I am an admirer of Pierre Mendès France, and I quote him, and very right, democracy is much more than the practice of elections and the government of majority. It's a kind of morals, of virtues, of worries, of civic sciences, of respect of the adversary. It's a moral code.
Merci.
Thank you, Anne. I'm sure if Pierre Mendès France would still be in this world, he would have been in this place. I met him while he was fighting for a solution in the Middle East. I'm sure he would have been with us tonight. I wish also a technical point. This meeting is mostly in French. Noa will sing later, will express herself in English. There is a simultaneous translation which is performed by Michel Zlotowski. And for those who do not understand French, they will find the right channel on their computer to find the English version. Following Anne Sinclair, we will hear Maurice Lévy. He's in the United States, but he wished to be with us through a recording that we made a fortnight ago in his offices in Paris. Maurice Lévy, chair of the board of the governors of for the peace, and member of the board of the Weizmann Institute and chairman of Publicis. Let's listen to him. Same question. What do you think about the draft law reducing the powers of the Supreme Court? I would like to say that for a very long time I have been an absolute supporter of the State of Israel, and that one of the things I like about this country is the vitality of its democracy, and the fact that there is this form of Supreme Court, which is a little bit like the American Supreme Court, an institution which is both like the Constitutional Council, the Conseil Constitutionnel that we know in France, and like the American Supreme Court. An important institution that maintains a very fair balance between the judiciary, the executive, and the legislative branches, and that this balance must be preserved at all costs. Everything I have read about these laws make me very worried for the State of Israel and its image. I'm going to use the little I know about communication to say how much Israel's image has been shaped on the democratic dimension. It's the only democratic state in the region. It's the only state that appears to the West and to the whole world as a state in which the check and balances, as they say, are perfectly balanced. And now, all of a sudden, with these measures, we create an imbalance, and this imbalance will perhaps not be seen right away, but it will be pernicious in the long run and will affect the democratic image of the State of Israel in a lasting way. This is why I'm personally very much opposed to these laws. I hope that the people who are currently in government will become aware of this and that they are going too far, that they will return to something more reasonable, because it's absolutely essential, not only for the image of Israel, but for the place of Israel in the world. Israel has gained in many areas a pioneering image, whether in the field of startups, technology, science, and especially in the field of democracy. This image must be preserved at all costs. It has an immeasurable value, and it's almost equal to the defensive shield that the State of Israel enjoys with Tzahal. It's very important, and therefore it is absolutely essential that this balance be preserved. What do you think about these laws and their consequences? It's not something I think. I'm sure of it. I've just come from the United States. I've been to New York, Los Angeles. I've met a lot of business leaders, friends, acquaintances, some Jewish, some non-Jewish, and everyone is worried. And it's a serious worry. And this concern is not only about human rights, but about the development of the State of Israel and the relationship that people have with the rule of law. It seems to me that someone like Benjamin Netanyahu, a man who knows the United States very well, must have a very acute awareness of this. Let him not be mistaken. In a way, this also adds to a deadly trend that we experience both in the United States and in Europe, which is the increase of anti-Semitism, and therefore this formidable shield, which is this open democracy where everything is allowed in Israel, and especially the freedom of expression, the freedom to express oneself against the government in an extremely open way, as we can see with the demonstrations that are taking place right now. I believe it is crucial that this awareness takes place and that we say to ourselves, beware, consequences will be economic, political. Let's not be mistaken, they're political. Israelis need to realize that this dimension, which they have been the first to use repeatedly. How many times have we heard in their discourse, we are the only democratic state in the region? It is an extremely precious asset that they must preserve at all costs. Jews all over the world support Israel for the vast majority of them. They support it in times of peace as well as in times of war. Time of peace has become much more important than time of war. And the reason that the Israeli economy is so successful, it is because the support is also very strong in times of peace. It shouldn't be that this support is only expressed in times of war, which nobody wants to see again. And that means that we can indeed fear a split of the diaspora's support. When I say division, split, it can be even harder than that. There can be a real break. I believe that our Israeli friends, I want to tell them how much we support them, and we support the State of Israel. Our Israeli friends do not realize the value of images and do not realize the power of words. And currently, what is happening is something that is doing them considerable harm. If they really want to continue their development, to pursue the Abraham Accords with other states, and to become a beacon in this region, a tormented, difficult region, our Israeli friends do not realize the value of images. They must be, again, exemplary. In this regard, there is no other way out. There's no possible negotiation. There's no middle ground. Either the state expresses itself in all its dimension in a completely democratic way, with all the powers in place, or it begins to cheat a little bit, and at that point it casts a shadow, to say the least, on the entire Israeli system and apparatus. There's no bargaining there. There's no half measures. The integrity of the Supreme Court must be respected, and the idea that a parliament could overrule, as if to use a term they will understand well, a decision of the Supreme Court is an idea that is not only unfortunate, but that can cause lasting harm and damage to the State of Israel. Thank you, Mr. Levy. He also wrote a op-ed in the daily Le Monde. We should have had also around this table Mrs. Edith Guez, who is a businesswoman of the high tech, and for reasons due to the economic and political situation, she couldn't be with us. So, just reminding that, but Einat Guez was among the organizers, and she took the floor several times during the demonstration that are happening here and there. She also, indeed, Elie will remind it, took very important positions. So I leave the floor to Alain Finkielkraut. Alain is one of the godfathers of JCall, with other people who are not here, like Bernard-Henri Lévy and Daniel Cohn-Bendit. Bernard-Henri Lévy and Daniel Cohn-Bendit are sending us their support, and Elie will read part of an item written by Bernard-Henri Lévy in the weekly Le Point, but Alain Finkielkraut, member of the Académie Française and philosopher, has the floor. Not to use and misuse the power. It's by nature of things, power should stop power. This is the major lesson of Montesquieu. In application of this principle, I protest in France against the drifts of the legislative against the judiciary. I protest in France against many decisions taken by the government, or decisions made by the Constitutional Council to decriminalize, in the name of the principle of fraternity, while the support of the circulation of foreigners in irregular situation, as if the Republican motto had as an assignment and a virtue to erase the borders. And according to the same principle and the same mindset, I support those who in Israel protest strongly against a reform, a judiciary reform that would not put no limit to the decisions of the political power. This power in Israel wants to have a free hand to multiply without any problem the Jewish implantation, Jewish settlements on the West Bank, and to desecularize as much as possible the state of Israel. And the demonstrators who are really marching in the streets week after week in Israel, evening after evening, by wearing the flag with the Star of David, are patriots and are defending at the same time democracy and political Zionism against the Messianic Zionism, which is the flag of the new government. Messianic means indifferent to the world, indifferent to the opinion, indifferent to what think and what is say the diaspora, because they obey to the will of God. We cannot separate the project of judicial reform from the propositions of the initiatives and of the statements made by Itamar Ben-Gvir and by Bezalel Smotrich, the two representatives of the religious Zionism within the coalition. Death penalty for terrorists, legalization of the settlements as an answer to the terrorist attacks, and stating that the Palestinian people does not exist. Benjamin Netanyahu, in a speech a few hours before his visit to London, called to avoid a disruption within the people. by firing his defense minister, who invited him to abandon this reform. Benjamin Netanyahu ratified this separation, or this drift within the people. On the one hand, you have people like Smotrich, Anne Sinclair said, who asked for the razing of the Palestinian village of Hawara following the assassination of two young members of a Jewish settlement. On the other hand, those who, like the officer in charge, IDF's officer in charge of the security of the West Bank, qualifying as a pogrom the fires, the arson of the houses and the cars in Hawara. He called it the pogrom. Those two Israel seem not to be possible to reconcile. I do what I can to help those who are in favor of the political Zionism. I think about David Grossman, who said about his son Uri, who was killed in his armored tank at the very last day of the war in Lebanon, that it was a young man that was not in his time, a child of the 50s with his total honesty and his way to assume the responsibility of whatever is happening around him. I trust, I'm confident, because I see in the streets of Tel Aviv, of Haifa, and of Jerusalem many young people of the 50s. In fact, individuals of all ages, which are out of the time, which are negating the diagnosis of all those, and they're numerous, until this parliament, who are looking at Zionism as of the last child of this fecund belly. An op-ed of the daily Le Monde, An Illusory Democracy, was the title of the op-ed, the day before the government of Netanyahu was implemented. No, Israel is deemed for admiration. Rak b'Israel, said Patrick Klugman. Zionism must be defended against those who in Israel is caricaturing it and threatening to destroy it. As a postscriptum, I would like you to hear a quote from the major Israeli historian, Mr. Talmon, who wrote a magnificent book, The Origin of Totalitarian Democracy. In our days, said Mr. Talmon, the only way to reach a coexistence between the peoples, and this might sound ironic and disappointing, is to separate them. Those words were written in 1980 in a letter sent to Menachem Begin, and they didn't lose any of its relevance, The letter to Talmon has aged without being outdated. If a government of Israel has the courage to derive its consequences, it is to be concerned that this separation, this break, will go into the armed confrontation. I'm admirative of the upheaval of part of the civil society in Israel and of the rising of a civil society, but I'm afraid also, because I don't know if Israel, split in two, will be able to avoid a civil war. Thank you.
Merci Alain.
Thank you, Alain. We went to Tel Aviv and interviewed Ms. Tzipi Livni, former Justice Minister and former Foreign Affairs Minister. Today, she retired from politics. Maybe she will come back to it, but we asked her also the meaning of this struggle she is leading in the streets of Israel.
Israel was born as a Jewish democratic state. As written in our Declaration of Independence, Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people with equal rights to all its citizens. For 75 years, we kept these two values of Israel, Jewish democratic state, with an hyphen, same level. But now there are those that are trying to take the Jewishness of the state and put it above Israel as a democracy, something which is not acceptable at all. So what you see now in Israel, these are not judicial reforms. This is turning the Jewishness of the state of Israel into a religious aspect instead of national one, and trying to minimize the nature of Israel as a democracy. I believe that democracy is a matter of values, of equal rights, of freedom, and it's not just system of election. And therefore, the good news is that lots and lots of Israelis understand now what's going on. They're taking the street, demonstrating with Israeli flags, saying that Israel will remain Jewish democratic state, nation state for the Jewish people with equal rights to all its citizens without discrimination. This is what we are fighting for.
Who could better illustrate this struggle of this Israel that we admire in the streets, that Noah that we admire for quite a long time, make us the great honor to be with us today, came during the night, early in the wee hours of the morning from Tel Aviv. She's with us. Noa, toda rabba shat itanu.
Shalom, everybody. Can you hear me this way?
Yes, can you, את יכולה לדבר.
I'm so far from the microphone. I'm very honored to be here. I'm sorry I don't speak French on this incredible panel. Anne, I've admired you very much for a long time, and I felt full resonance with everything you said. So try not to repeat so many things. And Patrick, right, as well, amazing and with passion. But everyone really. I haven't written anything. It's not my way. I can't read from a paper. I'm going to improvise. You know, we're musicians. We do that. But it comes always from the heart. The first point I'd like to make is it's not 500,000. It was 650,000 people. And that is big for a population of 9 million people. 650,000 people from north to south, from Kiryat Shmona to Eilat, all through Israel, in the intersections, in city squares, alongside the road, blocking roads, not blocking roads, with drums, with children, with Holocaust survivors, fighter pilots, the high-tech community, the medical community, everyone, the army. I myself, with my children, marched up to Jerusalem with the reserves duties movement. This is one of the most incredible things we have seen in Israel. The soldiers who are basically holding up the IDF, because the ones who are on mandatory service are a small part. The ones who really drive the IDF are the ones who volunteer for reserve duty, my husband included, and they're the ones who are marching to say, this is not the contract we have with the country. We cannot volunteer for a dictatorship. So this is inspiring and beautiful, like you've all said. This is the power of Israeli democracy and the incredible spirit of our society. I'd also like to say that the judicial reform, it's not a judicial reform. We have to erase these two words. This is a lie. It is an anti-democratic coup. We have to use these words. It's an anti-democratic coup. It may be that the judicial system needs fixing or amendment in some way, but it does not need this kind of reform. It needs some kind of, I would say, amelioration, like so many systems in Israel and everywhere in the world. This is an anti-democratic coup, and it's dangerous. I would also like to say a few words about Netanyahu. I'm sorry that I cannot contain myself, okay? This man is destructive to Israel. He's been in power for decades, and he should leave. He has been accused by the Israeli government of breach of trust, of fraud and bribery. He should be trying to defend himself in court. Rather, he is trying to change the Israeli courts. Is everyone not clear on how ridiculous this is, on how dangerous it is for Israel and for every country? This man should be away from politics in every sense. If it were up to me, it would be much worse than that. We should stop admiring this man. The fact that he has good English, I have good English. I can also be Prime Minister of Israel. This man stands in front of every media channel in the world and lies. He lies without even blinking. And it's appalling to us. He's saying, what? Canada has this kind of system. Can't Israel be like Canada? No, it does not. That is a lie. Israel does not have the checks and balances. We don't have a constitution. We don't have all the... This has been said. I won't repeat it. We have only the Supreme Court. You want to weaken the Supreme Court. You want to kill our democracy to save yourself. And in an evil coalition with messianic forces, with ultra-nationalists, with opportunists of all types, with criminals, accused criminals like Smotrich. Shameful for Israel that this man goes around the world calling himself an Israeli minister. Shameful, this is a dangerous man. He has said very clearly that his solution for the Palestinian problem is three things. One, they will either live under our rule, or they will leave of their own free will, or we will meet them at the edge of a gun. Is that a way to speak? That is horrible. That does not represent Israel in any way. I started my activism together with Gildor 27 years ago, when Yitzhak Rabin was murdered. One of the greatest inciters leading up to that murder was Itamar Ben-Gvir and his group of criminals. You know, he is now calling for a death sentence for terrorists, but of course only Muslim terrorists, not Jewish terrorists. And there are plenty of those, and he's well on the way of being one of them. This is appalling that our state of Israel, built by the Jewish people who have suffered so much discrimination throughout the years, would have these people in government. You know, we say about the Holocaust, never again, but it's not never again to the Jewish people. It's never again to any people. And we should be leading the torch of this movement. I can tell you for certain, I really hope I can come home tomorrow because of the strikes. By the way, that's a good thing. Finally, we have a general strike. You know, in France, they have general strikes every Monday and Tuesday. For us, we need to actually see the country disintegrating for there to be a strike. But now, finally, the unions have also joined, and there is a strike. That also means that the airport is closed. I hope that I will be able to come home. Why do I want to come home? Because I want to go back to Jerusalem, like I've already been in every single demonstration, together with hundreds of thousands of people. And if Netanyahu thinks that he can, with his lies, convince us to stop demonstrating, it's not going to happen. First of all, this legislation doesn't need to be changed. It needs to disappear. It is absolutely harmful. It is absolutely horrible for Israel and for anywhere in the world. And second, Netanyahu and his entire evil government should go home. They should be dispersed. We need new elections. We need a new government that will work for Israel. I want my children to be able to look at the government and see people who are not accused of horrible crimes, who are not criminals, who are not corrupt, clean, wonderful people working for the nation, the amazing country of Israel, the homeland of the Jewish people with equal rights for every single citizen, including Arabs and non-Jews and everyone that exists in our beautiful country who has made it what it is. We deserve a better government than these people. So no, we're not going to stop until they go home and leave us alone and enable us to build the beautiful country that we have already built. And that I can assure you. Now I want to say a few words about dreams, because we artists, we are in the business of dreams. The Jews had an amazing dream. Their dream was to come to the promised land and create a homeland for the Jewish people. a Jewish homeland. So people came from all over the world. My family from Yemen walked across the Saudi Arabian desert, then over the sea, came and settled in 1895, before there was even the state of Israel. It was still Palestine, to fulfill their dream. Many people came from countries where there was no serious oppression of the Jewish people. In fact, they lived well with the local population, but they were driven and they were brought in order to sustain this dream. But this dream that they were promised never really was fulfilled. And then you had the Zionist movement that came for different reasons. They wanted a liberal democracy, separated from the Jews of the shtetl and from the oppressed Jewish people. No, the new Jewish paradigm that worked and was educated, that was enlightened. That was their dream. Did that dream happen? No. Nobody's dream was fully fulfilled yet in the land of Israel. And so we need a new dream. We have to figure out a new dream that we can all dream together. And you know, with that in mind, I don't know if you know, but I was a yeshiva student before I came to Israel. In the United States, my parents sent me to yeshiva. And I would like to quote to you something beautiful from the prophet Zechariah. And I will say it first in Hebrew. And it says, "V'nilvu goyim rabim el Adonai bayom hahu, v'hayu li la'am." On the day of the coming of the Messiah, on the day of our redemption, nilvu goyim, many, many nations will come together with us, and we will become a nation. What does that mean, really? That means that the vision, the prophecy is of all nations coming together, and from there a great light will shine. And we've already started that. We've started to make peace with Egypt and with Jordan, with the United Arab Emirates, not to mention with Europe and the United States, all nations. We need to understand that without peace, we will never be able to fulfill our dream of being a free people in our country. We do not want to continue sending our children to die in senseless wars. My son is now in the army. My daughter, let me tell you what my daughter is doing. Now she's volunteering 1 year in a special boarding school for post-psychiatrically hospitalized youth, children who have suffered horrible abuse of all sorts and are trying to recover. She and her friends are helping them as big brothers and sisters, organizing events for them. 1 year of her life volunteering. And after that, she wants to be in active combat. She wants to be in the Navy and give another 2 years of her life. This amazing young woman that just before that was busy mostly with TikTok and Instagram. So you never know, there's something inside. Remember, you never exactly know what's going on inside. We have to believe in values. So that is important. And why am I saying that too? We need a dream that we're all part of. We cannot have a whole chunk of the Israeli population that does not go to the army, that does not work, that does not pay taxes. When we talk about equal rights, we talk about equal rights, equal opportunities, and equal responsibilities. You cannot have one without the other. A society cannot exist in that way. And for me, I mean also the Arabs, the 20% Arabs. They should also be able to volunteer in Israeli society, but they should need to be equal. And for that, we need peace. Peace with the Palestinians, equal rights for our Palestinian citizens in Israel, a shared society where everybody is equal, with equal opportunities and equal responsibilities, just like my daughter. And that is also a beautiful dream we can dream together. So we have to start thinking in a sense of dreams that will propel us into the future. I'd like to end with a philosophical idea, and that has to do with the Hebrew language. We all say it's the Jewish state, the Jewish democracy, but we have to admit there's a little bit of a paradox within that. What does that mean about the non-Jewish citizens of Israel? And what does Jewish mean? Is Jewish reform or conservative or orthodox? This is exactly what we're dealing with right now. You have fanatic Jewish people who are delegitimizing anything but their own small view of the world, which of course puts women totally out of the picture. We are nothing, we are air for them. No way, that's not going to happen, of course. You understand that Israelis will not let that happen. But the fact that it's even being discussed, maybe that's good. Let's be optimistic. We're facing that issue. We're facing this difficult issue and we have to deal with it, and we need a constitution to make sure that this never becomes a dominant part of our life. So when we think of all of these things and we think of the kind of society we want to build, let's focus for a moment on David Grossman that you mentioned, on the great poets and the writers, on Eliezer ben Yehuda, and the revival of the Hebrew language, from being an ancient biblical language to being a language that we can write in, we can rap in, we can make movies. The Israeli series are successful all over the world. They're brilliant. They're in Netflix and HBO. Hebrew language. Wow, that's a miracle. So it's the Hebrew state of Israel, the only one in the world where this incredible language is spoken. And I'll say another thing in favor of language. Language, as opposed to religion, is inclusive. Religion is exclusive. And language is the instrument of equal opportunity. So everyone should be speaking this language, including the ultra-Orthodox, not Yiddish, including the Arab population, not Arabic from day one, Arabic as well, Yiddish as well, Russian as well, but one language with which we can all have an integral society with equal opportunities, equal rights, and equal responsibilities. And I'd like to end, sorry if I've taken too long, with a little bit of music. We can't really do a concert here. Yeah, but wait, I don't know if this is conducive to, it's not really, sorry to say, we need more of that. But I want a little bit of something to sing for you here in this situation, just to exemplify the beauty of the Hebrew language and how it can adapt in the most unusual places. Gildor, my amazing friend and partner, musical partner, and I discovered that we could take some of the most beautiful sentences about the tree of life and peace in the Hebrew language, and and connect them to Mozart's Ave Verum, and how beautiful it sounds together. And this could only have happened in the state of Israel. Etz chaim hi lama chazikim ba vetomcheha meushar דרכיה דרכי נועם וחול נתיבותיה שלום השיבנו אליך ונשובה השיבנו אליך ונשובה. אמן ימינו כקדם. Thank you.
An important piece of news: Benjamin Netanyahu just announced the delay of the examination of the reform of justice draft law. Bernard, you brought us back to the reality while we were somewhere in the spheres. I thought I had to deliver this piece of news. As you said, it's just a delay, postponement. That means that we have still a long way to go. I would like to make a transition because the spirituality that I experienced, thanks to Noah, takes us now, and I'm very glad to be with us, to ask Rabbi Rivon Krygier, rabbi of the Masorti community of Adath Shalom in Paris, to say why he is opposed to this draft law and what is the meaning, what would happen, what would be the outcome regarding the Jewish being that he is, and what is the Judaism the way he sees it. Rivon, you have the floor. Let's not be mistaken. Israel is today at the crossroad. it has not only to choose between two visions totally opposed of democracy, illiberal or liberal democracy. It has to choose between two contrary visions of what should be a Jewish state. One consistent with democracy, the other one not. It is flabbergasting that we reach this place, and we cannot really close our eyes or turn a blind eye. As well as there are two converse visions of democracy, there are two ways of Judaism that everything seems to oppose, and the gap will not be closed with a magic wand. Read the program of religious laws which is on the agenda, that will still be on the agenda of the Knesset, and to listen to the statements or to read what's published by those who are by the spiritual leaders aspiring the religious parties in Israel today. Is a question to obtain a final dispense of military service for the yeshiva buchers, or to increase the subsidies, to have a strict separation of male and female in cultural demonstration or public demonstrations. Even in public transportation, we talk about rabbinical courts that will be able to judge civil cases, while we know there is no, in ultra-Orthodox milieu, an equality of rights in the meaning of modern states. We talk about strengthening the monopoly of the chief rabbinate in terms of conversion, strengthening the monopoly of orthodoxy as the only legitimate Judaism, which is not the case in any other state in the world. Enable a conscience clause according which a doctor would be entitled to refuse some treatment to homosexuals, or to refuse a room in hotels because their personal sexual orientation displeases the owner. Some rabbis are also suggesting to refuse any real estate sale or even the rental to people who are non-Jewish. All this is only for the most extreme factions, only the foretaste of a larger agenda that will not hesitate to say, alas, that it is deeply sexist, segregationist, and supremacist. In their vision of Judaism, you're not equal if you're a Jew or a non-Jew, male, female, religious or non-religious, Orthodox or non-Orthodox, qualified as heretic. It's not today, it's been dozens of years that we enabled in Israel by candidness or by opportunism to develop a network of schools and religious academies with state financing, where you have a theocratical ideology, deeply anti-democratic. Let's not be mistaken. If the so-called reform of justice is voted, the radical religious parties will be the majority of the government, will weigh in full to vote laws against freedoms without any checks and balance. What is in the future is the opening of a Pandora box, paving the way to the fundamentalists and ultranationalists of all sides. However, there is another Judaism, another way of seeing Judaism. We see it in the demonstration of the civil society in Israel, where you have people openly religious of any denominations, and not only non-Orthodox. Let us think about major rabbinical figures which are defenders of democracy, that took part in the birth of the state or who occupied rabbinical positions of acting position. Ben Sion Uziel, chief rabbi of the Yishuv before the creation of the state, defending the voting rights of women against other rights. Chaim David Halevi, chief rabbi of Tel Aviv in the 90s, who stated a Jewish law opposed to any discrimination, ethnic discrimination. Yes, would people say, when you look at the writings since the Bible, going through the Talmud up to the rabbinical writings of the states of our times, we have a stratified, compartmented society. So some evil-minded minds state that democracy is an idea foreign to Judaism. That's false. That's absurd. Or we would agree that it's the whole world that is foreign to Judaism, because in 3,000 years, all the societies moved forward, progressed. Judaism transformed itself. We can only commend ourselves without going to the naive idea of a linear progress of civilization. So I would ask the base question that remains like a blind point, a black spot. Listen to this question. It might seem to you surrealistic, but it is today very present in a latent way. Wishing a Jewish state, does it mean to aim progressively, little by little, to re-establish the society of ages past, of the antique days, and the Talmud of the Middle Ages, a society within which, let me remind you, we're practicing slavery, patriarchate, flogging, heresy, heretic were killed, where if fidelity to Judaism would mean to little by little restore this kind of norms, this kind of standards, as described or ascribed in the classic writings, we are fundamentalists. We're not very far away from the mullah in Iran. However, if faithfulness to authentic Judaism is to see how since the Bible, through the Talmud and the writings of today, is an aspiration to more justice, more consideration for the dignity of the individuals, then we are in the melting pot of democracy. If there is an extraordinary aspect of the biblical literature, is that we see prophets that are criticizing the power of the kings, rabbis who oppose their opinions one to the others in an intensive culture of discussion and a search for the right standard while respecting the minority opinion. Yes, I claim with pride many ideas of freedom of speech, of opinion, the right to plurality and to criticism. They are the heart of our tradition. Yes, you can be at the same time committed in its faith, in its piety, honor the religious discipline that is raising the human to the sacred while defending the right of each and every individual to make his own choices in conscience, welcoming in the greatest respect those who are from another culture or from another religion. Let's be careful. Everywhere in the world, we observe an erosion of the culture of freedom. The struggle now in Israel to defend democracy is of concern to all of us, because in the future we might have to lead it here, this struggle, in Europe, within the values and the sacred idea that we cannot have those ideas triumphed by coercion, but only by persuasion. Within the core of these values is the prophecy of each power must have a counterpower to limit it, not to abuse of its authority, according privileges, tolerating corruption, and by curbing minorities. There must be checks and balances. This must be made in dialogue, a consensus, and not through force. May the Lord hear this prayer inspired by Amos, the prophet. Let the right spring like water and justice like a spring. Let the everlasting extend its peace on all the people of Israel and on all mankind. For those who do not understand Hebrew, I'd like to state that in this prayer, read by Rivon, in his conclusion, this is the prayer of Friday in all the synagogues of the world, and the Masorti tradition, the tradition of Adath Shalom and Rivon Krygier, העושה על עם ישראל ועל כל עמי תבל, to all the peoples of the globe. This is not, say, in the consistory synagogues. This is very important to be stated.
Maintenant,
Now, we're talking about constitution. We think in France about a major figure, major individual who was a member of the Conseil Constitutionnel, a major cabinet minister of justice of the President Mitterrand, Robert Badinter. The first question we asked Mr. Badinter, since one of the projects of this government is to establish the death penalty only for the Palestinian terrorists, the first question we asked him was, what does he think about this project? Please, let's listen to Mr. Robert Badinter. I assume he's against, says Elie Barnavi. זה בעצם מה שכתוב בשאלה הזאת. One of the things that Jews around the world were proud of after the Second World War, which was so cruel to them, was that the state of Israel did not want to introduce the death penalty into its legislation. It was, in a way, the answer of civilization of life to Hitlerism and to death. And we all the Jews beyond the state of Israel, took a great pride in the fact that the newly reconstituted Jewish state refused the death penalty, which was the very sign of Nazi barbarism. I know that Eichmann, I attended the trial from afar, was sentenced to death and executed. But since the establishment of the state until now, and despite the constant attacks by terrorists, Israel has never wanted to reinstate the death penalty. Never. And yet, terrorism is not new. It is not only the necessary dimension of humanity that must prevail in the reconstituted state of Israel. It is also a movement that is sweeping across the world all democracy. Democracy and death penalty are not compatible. And we have to be lucid. Terrorists have a secret and neurotic relationship with death. They give death. They love death. They are agents of death. Dying for them is nothing other than responding to this secret fascination. It is absurd to hope that the death penalty will deter terrorism. It is a betrayal of what is most sacred to us. To accept, to give death, is to join the executioner, the henchmen of the Jews and the adversaries of Israel today. That Mr. Netanyahu has chosen the path of political demagogy is his own way of conceiving the relationship with the Israeli electorate. This is not, in my opinion, the most honorable way to address the people of Israel. It is called illiberal democracy, but I say simply and firmly, attacking a necessary institution that has shown in the past its commitment to basic freedoms and would still do it today, it's indeed an attack on what constitutes the very inspiration of the State of Israel, the law, respect for the law. I know the Supreme Court of Israel well. I've been friends with a number of its members. It's a court that greatly honors the State of Israel. And has rendered the greatest service in the service of freedom and the law. Attacking the Supreme Court is to attack what constitutes the very essence of Judaism, and I would say of the State of Israel today. That is, the respect for the law. The law is the sacred word for the Jews. We Jews are in love with law. The temple of his law in Israel today is the Constitutional Court, the Supreme Court. And therefore, to attack this high court that is so respected in Israel and beyond Israel is to lower oneself for purely political purposes. I would even say politicking, to lower Israel in the world. Again, it's not for the people of the law to attack the temple of the law. I think this last sentence will remain with us. Elie Barnavi, you don't have to introduce him in Brussels, who is taking the floor this evening as a founding father of JCall, and also with a certain amount of his friends, diplomats, former diplomats of Israel, of the Policy Working Group, an active group to promote a political solution to the too-long conflict we have with the Palestinians, and to influence as much as possible the international policy so that there would be a solution to this conflict. Elie, it's up to you to conclude this session. Thank you, David. The honor in the round table to be the last of a panel as a good aspect. You have nothing else to say. Everything has been said already, and very well so. So I don't have a lot to do, right? But however, we cannot respect a contract at a minimum. Moreover, our friend Bernard-Henri Lévy, who couldn't be with us today, asked me to read as his message some excerpts of his op-ed in the weekly French magazine Le Point. So I'll do so, and I will go on with some personal comments that you will see as a conclusion. This op-ed was published on March 16th, and it starts with a love statement for Israel. You know the style of Bernard-Henri Lévy. It's really very alluring, and it starts with, I love Israel, but I don't have the time to read it all, so I go directly to the crux of the matter, because he goes on after this song of love. He says his concern, his anger, given the political and moral crisis that is shaking the country of Israel. The sorcerers, apprentice sorcerers, will they have their say? Nothing is taken for granted or for sure, because it's a revolt wind that is rising in Israel against those suicide attacks. Fighter pilots of Tzahal refusing a training session, reserve people of the Navy that refuse to serve a country like Hungary or Poland and blocking the port of Haifa. It looks like a constitutional putsch. They all state that they will disobey orders that will imperil the situation of the country, and the hundreds of thousands of Israelis taking to the streets to remind that their fathers, grandfathers freed a people that was defenseless up to then, and who didn't sacrifice themselves for this to end in a caricature of the Jewish genius, i.e. the religious parties of today. It's in this civil society, which is the beating heart of Israel, it's those forces that the friends of Israel should everywhere around the world encourage. We'll have to maintain two strong ideas in mind. Israel trying for so many crises that there's no doubt about the outcome. And in the long history of this young nation, the bad people are not very important. But what if I'm wrong? If the wind of nihilism would take over? If the metaphysics of Herzl would be dissolved in the worst policy? We shouldn't be discouraged or fall in the trap opened by the evil mind, as well as there is a certain idea of France and of Italy or of any other country surviving those ill treatment. Even an outraged Israel would survive, be alive. Until then, Bernard-Henri Lévy wrote, then his successor, i.e. myself, I would just make three remarks, three comments. Listening to you, my friends, in the language which is yours, which is ours, and the language polite, courteous, sometimes professional, talking about populist drift. I was wondering if these words are really describing the horror of what is happening. You have to be on location. You have to see those people. You have to listen to them, to hear them, to understand that populist drift is a kind expression. We are in an absolute emergency. We are dealing with a team of barbarians with a radical attempt of destruction of the democratic regime in Israel. Even those are trivial words. I hope they are stronger than populist drift. They don't give a damn about democracy, conversely so. They hate democracy. Democracy is a Greek regime, so anti-Jewish to them. I'm not talking about Netanyahu. Netanyahu, it's another case, it's another issue. Noah said what had to be said about Netanyahu, and she was very kind. It's a smart and cultivated Trump. I like much better the other one. Facing this brutality, facing this destructive pulsion, we did what we needed to. This is my second point. And I think that we can be proud of this country. I didn't expect that. They didn't either, Netanyahu and his team. I was writing in an op-ed recently of the liberal bear that was sleeping, hibernating. You know, when it's cold in Tel Aviv, you live well in Tel Aviv, when you live in Tel Aviv. Unkind things are happening. Unkind things happen in Tel Aviv, but we get used to everything, especially when life is pleasant. Nice weather, beautiful girls, there's the seashore, and the bear woke up. The other was so confident that the liberal bear will never wake up and could do to him anything. The bear woke up, rose, and roared. You know, we liberals, we are, how should I say, weak. We don't like conflicts. We don't like confrontation. We are tolerant. We want to understand the other, even if he's hateful. It is difficult to mobilize us. It takes time. It's true for individuals, like for democracies, liberal democracies. But when we feel that all our passions is over, that we're on the verge of the abyss, we become feral. And I have seen, it was a magnificent vision. I could see brothers and sisters, Democrats in Israel, become fierce, feral. I could see the hatred in their eyes. And this light did me well because it's a promise of a future. This is why they cannot win. They cannot win because you do not win against all the forces, living forces of the country. You cannot govern against all the elites of the country. I noticed the other day that all the authoritarian regimes are trying to divide the elites and win part of the elites everywhere around the world. Look, either in Hungary, Poland, Brazil, everywhere. In Israel, Netanyahu and theirs are alone. It's extraordinary. They have no one on their side. There was a letter from 300 economists who signed a long time ago. They didn't find one economist to defend their reform, judiciary reform. It's remarkable. True in Israel, true around the world, where people start to look at Israel, the Israeli regime, with a bizarre look. They say, oh, it can't go on like that. Everywhere he goes, Netanyahu, he's welcomed by demonstration. He's being humbled by his hosts. You cannot win under such circumstances. What will be the shape of this victory? What will we do with our victory? I don't know how it's going to end up. what I know, that he cannot win. But I will not. We will win. I don't know how we will win. I don't know what will be the shape or the content of this victory. What I feel on the go of this demonstration, the op-eds I read, discussions with my friends, that we will not want to go back to the status quo ante. There is no return after such a crisis, after such a shake-up, one of the rare moments in the nation that is dividing between the before and an after. You don't go back. You don't backtrack. There's going to be a new way. We will demand things we never dared to until now, because life was like that and we got used to it. We will ask for a constitution. We'll ask at long last to get back in our minds, in our hearts, the Palestinian issue. Because let's not be mistaken, all this what is happening to us, all the monsters we gave birth to, Smotrich and Ben Gvir, they all come from occupation. They would have had no chance whatsoever, if there wouldn't have been the occupation of the territories, if there wouldn't have been this cancer eating up the body of the nation, because it's like the fog of Chernobyl. The fog of Chernobyl didn't stop at the borders of France. The non-right brutality, bullishness is trickling down. This is how we lost Rabin. Yigal Amir is a product of this place. This is how we are losing our democracy. We will have to deal at long last with the problem of occupation. And third and last point, if we are here today, if I'm here today, I'm not Belgian, I'm not French, I'm not even European, technically speaking. Belgian, French, and European. If I'm here, it's not to tell you all this and to talk to you about the Israeli politics. It's not for you to convince you to do well. What are the benefits of liberal democracy? It's to ask you, to tell you that we need allies, that we don't want to be alone. Jews of diaspora are important to support us in this struggle. American Jews do it. European Jews are dilly-dallying, so to speak. Is to say to my excellent friend Bernard Guetta that we need the voice of Europe. And the voice of Europe is really shy and weak and coward. It's true for the other democratic states. We need to tell us, this is to be a friend of Israel, not to caress us, oh, how marvelous you are. It's to say, you are getting deep into, you know what, you're losing your marks. We have the means to wake you up. You see what I mean, Bernard? We discussed it. And this is why this policy group is existing, small group. We are really agitating ourselves. We write letters to cabinet ministers, to members of parliaments, trying to convince them about the emergency of the issue. So I know the historian that I am is supposed to ignore the idea of irreversibility, except death. I'm scared that beyond a certain threshold, our situation will become irreversible. I'm not talking about democracy. I think we're going to win this one, but if we do not solve this Palestinian issue, if we do not really go deep into this deadly alternative of apartheid or civil war, then the fate of Israel will be at stake. And it's going to be too late to say we should have helped them not to go there. So we need allies. Please think of it. Every morning, shaving yourself or making up. Thank you.
Merci, Elie.
Thank you, Elie Barnavi. You said, among others, that the bear woke up the Israeli society. I would like to remind an item written by a friend that we welcomed you, Shaul Arieli, reserve officer, one of the best historians, wrote an item saying that what's happening now, this law, this draft law, is crazy, is the Pearl Harbor of Israel. Remember, 41, what the Japanese Rear Admiral, when we awoke a giant after Pearl Harbor. What we see in the streets of Israel is the awakening of a giant. This is what we have here today. Bernard, you have the floor. I cannot not answer the question raised by Elie Barnavi. He asked the MEP that I am. The answer is of a biblical simplicity. The Holocaust was European. And in this parliament, the weight of the guilt, of the European guilt, remains so gigantic that it's extraordinarily difficult not to raise or to tackle, but to have react the parliament on what is happening in Israel today, or simply about the colonization for so many years. Recently, at the last plenary of the European Parliament, we had a discussion about the political crisis in Israel. This is what we said, the political crisis in Israel. I concluded my speech in the plenary saying that we had means of pressure, political but also economic means of pressure on the Israeli government. And I felt a terrible cold. People were so, they shied away from that because the Holocaust was European and the guilt remains tremendous. No, don't tell me, well, I know. I'm telling you what is happening. And what is happening is really important. It's important because I can tell you well before this issue of the judicial change or the attempt of judicial change in Israel. I tried several times. I made several attempts in group and plenaries, but I felt this paralysis that I was talking about right now. One more sentence. I would like, in your name of all, thank those of my friends, members of the European Parliament, who found time to take part in our discussion. I would like to thank Pierre Larotourou and Pascal Durand of the group, Social Democratic Group, who know perfectly what the esteem and the affection I have for them. I would like to thank especially my very, very friend Roja Thun, who is here present, friend of 40 years' time since Solidarność, since the great time of Poland, and great fighter in favor of the freedoms in Poland, and leading in Poland the struggle that, my dear friends, you are leading in Israel, because it's exactly the same thing. beyond Ruja, I would like to thank my friends of the Renew Group, Max Orville, Ilina Sicurel, and Javier Nart, my friend of El País, my colleague of El País. Thank you. Well, I'm reminded to order, rightly so. I have to thank, not only, but we have to thank, first and foremost, Melanie, my assistant, without whom absolutely nothing of what we experienced would have happened. Thank you, all of you, and I thank her especially. Thank you. Since we thank, I wish personally to thank Michel Zlotowski, who from his booth translated the whole evening. This evening, I hope, was taped, recorded. I hope it will be put online as of tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, on JCall website, on our TV, YouTube website. You will be able to see it again and again. I don't know in which language, but anyway. Thanks, all of you. From a technical point of view, those who came by bus, who can't go back to Paris this evening, have a meeting somewhere, I don't know where. So, Martine, who is in charge of the group, please coordinate with the group. Thanks to all of you, and we have to